Yes, officers. There's a black kid here, causing trouble in the neighborhood. The words hung in the air as sirens pierced the evening quiet on Rosewood Drive. Red and blue lights pulsed across manicured lawns, painting the suburban tranquility in ominous colors. Put your hands where we can see them! Officer Blake's voice cut through the air with an unnecessary aggression, his tone already convicting the boy of some heinous crime. The basketball slipped from Zion's grasp, bouncing once on the asphalt before rolling into the gutter, forgotten. On her pristine lawn stood Brinley Ashworth, the 45-year-old woman who had made the call. Her designer athleisure outfit likely cost more than a month's rent for most people. Her manicured finger was pointed like a weapon at 9-year-old Zion Mitchell, whose only threat was a basketball jersey and the confused expression of a child whose world had just been turned upside down. Zion slowly raised his hands, his movements careful and deliberate, just as black parents across America teach their children to do from an early age. But what happened next would shock everyone, including the officers who thought they were responding to just another routine call. None of them knew that a phone call Zion had just made would bring someone to Rosewood Drive who would shatter their reality. Someone who would expose Brinley's lies, challenge the officers' assumptions, and prove that justice often arrives when you least expect it. The events of that night would become a lesson in the dangerous power of prejudice and the shocking truth of who Zion Mitchell really was. This confrontation, however, was not a sudden explosion, but the culmination of a slow-burning fuse lit 3 weeks earlier on a sunny Saturday morning when 9-year-old Zion first set foot on Rosewood Drive. He had no idea the move would place him in the crosshairs of a woman whose bitterness would nearly destroy his life. Zion and his mother, Dr. Imani Mitchell, a brilliant pediatric surgeon, were moving into his grandmother's house. Nana Cordelia's home at 247 Rosewood Drive was modest but lovely, with a large driveway perfect for shooting hoops. Zion wasn't just any 9-year-old. He was intelligent beyond his years, the kind of child who said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," without being reminded, who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and who dreamed of playing college basketball. But there was a mystery to his family that even he didn't fully understand. His father worked long hours in what Zion only knew as government work. Every morning before dawn, his dad would leave in a perfectly pressed suit, carrying a briefcase, looking important and serious. He often returned late, long after Zion was asleep. When asked what his father did, Zion would simply say, "He works for the government. It's important." He didn't know that his father's job was about to become the most important detail of his young life. 4 houses down lived Brinley Ashworth, the self-appointed queen of the Rosewood Drive neighborhood watch. At 45, she wielded her position to make others miserable. Her husband, Preston, an investment banker, worked such long hours he was barely aware of his wife's daily crusades. Their 16-year-old twins, Caitlin and Braxton, were so embarrassed by their mother they avoided her at all costs. But Brinley's obsession wasn't her family. It was maintaining what she called suburban perfection. Her days began like a surveillance expert's, checking her 6-ring camera feeds, then scanning the neighborhood Facebook group and Nextdoor app, ready to post complaints about everything from lawn heights to unfamiliar cars. She saw property values as her personal responsibility, and she took it dangerously seriously. Patrolling the area were 2 officers who shared her twisted worldview, Garrett Blake and Nash Sterling. Partners for 3 years, they had a reputation for unnecessary stops in minority neighborhoods and racist jokes made in the privacy of their squad car. During Zion's first week, he was just a boy being a boy, shooting hoops and riding his bike. Most neighbors waved back at his cheerful greetings, but not Brinley. From her window, she watched him like a predator. In her eyes, a boy dribbling a basketball was loitering. A walk to the corner store was suspicious behavior. By the end of the week, she had filed her first complaint with the Homeowners Association, ongoing loitering and suspicious behavior by non-resident minor. She described Zion as a young male engaging in surveillance activities and demanded action against this clear security threat. The HOA president, a reasonable man named Robert Chen, knew Nana Cordelia was expecting her grandson and filed the complaint away, hoping it was a misunderstanding. Brinley was just getting started. Week 2 brought a sinister escalation. Zion loved the sound of his new basketball on the concrete. To him, the sound of a dream. To Brinley, it was ammunition. She called the non-emergency line, claiming the repetitive noises sounded like gunshots and were causing her severe anxiety. When the responding officer found Zion shooting hoops while his grandmother watched from the porch, he could only apologize for the inconvenience and leave, shaking his head at the absurdity. But the complaint was logged. Brinley now had a paper trail. By week 3, her campaign had become malicious. On Nextdoor, she posted vague warnings about concerning gang activity and suspected drug dealing, cautioning neighbors about suspicious individuals who don't belong. She never used Zion's name, but her descriptions of his clothing and age were unmistakable. She was creating a wanted poster for a 9-year-old child whose only crime was being black in her neighborhood. Brinley was building a narrative, documenting a pattern that existed only in her imagination. On that final Tuesday evening, as the sun set, Zion was practicing free throws in the driveway, unaware he was being watched. After 3 weeks of building her case, Brinley was ready to act. As Zion practiced a crossover, the ball got away from him, rolling toward the street. He jogged after it, catching it just before it reached the curb. When he turned, a smile of relief on his face, he saw her. Brinley Ashworth was storming across her lawn, her face twisted with rage. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her voice shattering the quiet. "I've been watching you. I know what you're up to." Zion froze, clutching the ball. "I'm just playing basketball, ma'am," he replied, his voice small but respectful. "I live here with my grandmother." "Don't lie to me," she spat, stepping closer. "I've seen you casing houses for weeks. You're looking for what to steal, aren't you? I want to see your ID." A 9-year-old child. She was demanding ID from a 9-year-old child. Zion's confusion turned to fear. "Ma'am, I don't have an ID. I'm 9. I live right there," he said, pointing to his grandmother's house. Instead of backing down, Brinley doubled down. "You don't belong here," she screamed, following him as he retreated toward his own front steps. "I know your type. You're here to steal." Then, as Zion reached his grandmother's porch, she pulled out her phone. Harassment wasn't enough. She needed something that would guarantee the police took her seriously. She began to invent evidence. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice shifting to a tone of fake realization. "My garden gnomes. They went missing last week. Worth over $200. And my packages have been tampered with. I'm sure I saw you looking into car windows." With Zion standing on his porch, terrified, Brinley dialed 911, ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. 911, what's your emergency? "Yes, this is Brinley Ashworth. There's a black male, appears to be in his late teens, who's been robbing houses in our neighborhood. He just tried to break into cars, and when I confronted him, he became violent. I'm a single woman alone, and I'm terrified." Late teens, single woman. Every word was a calculated lie. "I think you might have a weapon," she continued. "He keeps reaching into his pockets. I need officers here immediately." A weapon. She was describing a child holding a basketball as an armed and dangerous criminal. "Can you describe the suspect?" the operator asked. "Black male, about 17 or 18, maybe 6 feet tall, wearing a basketball jersey, acting very aggressively." Every detail was a fiction, designed to ensure that officers would arrive expecting a dangerous adult, not a child. But while Brinley was spinning her web, Zion, scared but composed, was doing exactly what his parents had taught him. He called his mother. "Mom, that lady is yelling at me and calling the police," he whispered. "She says I stole things." Dr. Mitchell, in the middle of a surgery, stepped out. "Zion, baby, go inside with Nana right now. Keep your hands visible, be respectful, and call your father immediately." Then Zion made the call that would change everything. "Dad," his voice was shaking. "That neighbor is calling the police again. She's saying I stole things from her." He listened, then nodded. "I know. Hands visible. Stay calm. Wait for you." A long pause. "I'm scared, Dad. She's telling them I'm dangerous." Another pause. "Okay. I love you too." As he hung up, he remembered his father's last words. "I'm on my way, son. And when I get there, everyone involved is going to learn exactly who they're dealing with." As Zion waited, officers Garrett Blake and Nash Sterling were responding to a call that played directly into their prejudices. The squad car screamed down Rosewood Drive, sirens blaring. "Sounds like another punk who thinks he can steal from decent people," Blake said, checking his weapon. These kids need to learn there are consequences. Sterling nodded eagerly. The fact that he's still on scene means he's either stupid or dangerous. Either way, we're going to show him what happens when you mess with our neighborhood. Our neighborhood. As if it belonged to them. When they stepped out of their car, their minds were already made up. They hadn't come to investigate a crime. They had come to arrest a criminal. The only flaw in their flawless operation was the criminal himself, a 9-year-old boy clutching a basketball. But to the officers, that was a distinction without a difference. "Put your hands where I can see them," Blake screamed at Zion, his own hand hovering over his weapon as he advanced on the child, who stood frozen on his own grandmother's porch. "Get on the ground, now!" Terrified, but trying to remember his parents' instructions, Zion slowly raised his hands and began to comply. Before he could fully process the command, Sterling was on him, roughly grabbing his small arms and forcing him down onto the cold concrete steps. "I didn't do anything wrong," Zion pleaded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion. "I live here with my grandmother. I was just playing basketball." It was then that Blake delivered a line that would hang in the air, a stain on the evening. "Shut up. We'll do the talking here." A grown police officer telling a 9-year-old child to shut his mouth. Sterling added his own contribution to the disgraceful display. "You match the description of a robbery suspect. You're under arrest." But Zion didn't match any description except for one immutable fact. His skin was black. The suspect Brinley had described to 911 was a man in his late teens, over 6 feet tall, a far cry from the small boy they were now treating like a hardened felon. And that's when Brinley stepped onto the stage to deliver an Academy Award-worthy performance of counterfeit victimhood. "Thank God you're here," she cried, rushing toward the officers with tears that seemed to appear on command. "That's him. That's the boy who's been terrorizing our neighborhood." She pointed at Zion with the dramatic flair of someone identifying a serial killer, not a child who had been playing in his own yard. "He stole my garden decorations, worth over $200, she sobbed, laying it on thick for the officers, who devoured every word. "And my packages. I had $500 worth of packages stolen from my porch. I'm sure it was him." But Brinley was just warming up. "He broke into my garage and stole $300 worth of tools," she continued, each accusation more elaborate than the last. "I've seen him watching my house at night, casing it, planning his next robbery." The officers didn't ask for evidence. They didn't question the timeline or wonder how a 9-year-old could possibly carry off $300 worth of tools. They simply believed, because her words confirmed the prejudices they already held. "Do you have this on camera?" Sterling asked, hoping to solidify his case. "Absolutely," Brinley lied without a flicker of hesitation. "I have it all recorded on my Ring camera. The theft, the threats, everything." Of course, no such recordings existed because none of the crimes had ever occurred. But the officers didn't bother to verify. They were too busy preparing to arrest a child on the word of a woman whose hatred was driving her to commit felony perjury. Hearing the commotion, Nana Cordelia emerged from the house to find her grandson being brutalized on her own front porch. This elderly woman, a resident of Rosewood Drive for 30 years, knew every neighbor by name. "Officers, there has been a mistake," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "This is my grandson, Zion. He lives here with me and his mother. He's 9 years old, and he has never stolen a thing in his life." But Blake and Sterling weren't interested in a narrative that contradicted their own. "Ma'am, step back," Blake ordered dismissively. "We're conducting an investigation." "But I can show you his school registration," Nana Cordelia pressed, trying to offer the simple proof that would clear up this whole nightmare. "I have his birth certificate, his medical records." Sterling cut her off with a callousness that would make blood boil. "We know your type. You'll say anything to protect him. This kid doesn't belong in neighborhoods like this." "Your type." He said that to a woman who had been a pillar of the community for 3 decades. Drawn by the flashing lights, other neighbors began to step out of their homes. Mrs. Santos from across the street approached. "Officers, I've watched this child for 3 weeks," she said. "He is the most polite, respectful boy. He helps me carry my groceries. There is no way he has stolen anything from anyone." The officers, however, had already made their decision. "Save it for the judge, kid," Blake sneered at Zion. What happened next revealed just how easily a child's respectful behavior could be twisted into a confession of guilt. Despite the terror, despite the armed men screaming at him, Zion maintained the composure his parents had taught him. He continued to ask politely if he could call his father. He provided his correct address. He offered to have his grandmother show them his ID. To Blake and Sterling, this wasn't evidence of good character. It was suspicious. "This kid's too calm," Blake muttered to his partner. "Most guilty kids would be crying or running by now. He looks calculating." Sterling nodded. "Yeah, and he keeps asking to call his father. They all do that when they get caught, try to get family to cook up an alibi." They were using a child's respect as evidence of a criminal mind. And then, they made the decision that would change everything. "Zion Mitchell," Blake announced, reading the name from his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for theft, criminal trespassing, and resisting arrest." Resisting arrest, a charge they leveled against a 9-year-old who had complied with every command. As they prepared to put him in the back of their patrol car, Zion made one last, desperate plea. "My father is on his way," he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "Please, just wait for him. He can explain everything." Blake delivered the line that would soon come back to haunt him. "Your daddy isn't going to save you from this one." As they opened the patrol car door, none of them, not Blake, not Sterling, not Brinley, had any idea that the man driving toward Rosewood Drive at that very moment was about to turn their entire world upside down, because Zion's daddy wasn't just coming to save him, he was coming to deliver justice. Just as Blake was about to drive away, the air was split by the sound of more sirens, approaching fast from a different direction. A black police SUV with flashing emergency lights pulled up with an authority that made everyone on Rosewood Drive fall silent. Blake and Sterling exchanged a satisfied glance, assuming it was the backup they had requested. "Finally," Blake muttered. "Looks like the department is taking this seriously." "Probably sending a supervisor," Sterling agreed, straightening his uniform, proud of the work they had done. In their twisted minds, they had just apprehended a dangerous suspect. They had no idea that the person stepping out of that vehicle was about to destroy their careers. The door opened and out stepped Chief Dakari Mitchell. He was 48 years old, and every inch the picture of law enforcement authority. His dress uniform was immaculate, his badge and insignia gleaming in the evening light. But it wasn't his rank that seized everyone's attention. It was his face. He scanned the scene with the cold, calculating expression of a man cataloging every mistake, preparing to deliver a verdict from which there would be no appeal. Blake and Sterling's satisfaction curdled into nervous confusion. This wasn't backup. This was their boss. "Chief Mitchell," Sterling stammered. "We weren't expecting—" "We have this under control, sir." The chief didn't respond. His eyes moved methodically, taking in the handcuffed child, the self-satisfied woman nearby, the gathered neighbors, and finally, his 2 officers, who were suddenly looking very uncomfortable. "Give me your report," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made grown men stand at attention. "I want to know exactly what happened here." Blake, attempting to regain his confidence, launched into a summary. "Sir, we responded to a 911 call about a robbery suspect. The complainant identified this individual. When we arrived, the suspect matched the description provided, and the victim positively identified him." Chief Mitchell listened without expression, making notes in a small pad. "Continue." Sterling jumped in. "The suspect was non-cooperative, attempting to distract us by asking to call someone. We determined he was trying to establish an alibi and proceeded with the arrest for theft, criminal trespassing, and resisting arrest." "Resisting arrest?" The chief's voice was edged with ice. "What exactly did the suspect do to resist?" The officers glanced at each other, suddenly realizing their story might have a few holes. "Well, sir, he was uncooperative. He kept asking questions instead of following commands." Before the chief could respond, Brinley Ashworth saw her moment. Unaware of who this imposing man was, but recognizing his rank, she approached with the swagger of someone certain of her righteousness. "Thank goodness," she exclaimed. "This criminal has been terrorizing our neighborhood for weeks." Chief Mitchell turned his attention to her, and she took his focus as an invitation to begin the performance of a lifetime. "I have evidence, witnesses, everything you need to put him away," she declared, gesturing dramatically at Zion. "He's stolen over $1,000 of property from my home alone. Garden decorations, packages, tools. He's been systematically robbing our entire neighborhood." She built to a crescendo, oblivious to the tightening of the chief's jaw. I've seen him watching my house at night, casing it. He threatened me when I confronted him. I have it all on camera. This boy is dangerous, and he doesn't belong here. The chief listened to every word, continuing to take detailed notes. To Brinley, it seemed like a thorough investigation. She had no idea she was providing testimony for her own prosecution. Then, Chief Mitchell turned back to his officers. So you arrested this young man based solely on this woman's accusations? No physical evidence? No verification of the alleged crimes? Blake, sensing something was terribly wrong, tried to defend their actions. Well, sir, she seemed credible and he fit the description she provided to dispatch. That's when Chief Mitchell asked the question that shattered everything. What description? Of a black 9-year-old? A deafening silence fell. Blake and Sterling suddenly understood that their chief knew something they didn't. The chief walked over to Zion, who stood silent, still handcuffed. For the first time, his professional mask slipped, revealing something deeply personal. "Son," he said, his voice gentle. "Are you hurt?" Zion shook his head, relief flooding his eyes. For the first time that evening, someone in authority had spoken to him like a human being. Chief Mitchell stood and turned back to the stunned crowd. "Officers Blake and Sterling," he said, his voice now a blade of official steel. "The criminal you just arrested for robbery, trespassing, and resisting arrest is my son." The words landed like a thunderbolt. Blake and Sterling looked as if they were about to be physically sick. Color drained from Brinley's face, her mouth falling open in disbelief. "That's impossible," she stammered. "How was I supposed to know?" "Know what?" the chief shot back, his voice cold with precision. "That you shouldn't file false police reports? That you shouldn't fabricate crimes? That you shouldn't accuse children of felonies based on the color of their skin?" Blake, his career flashing before his eyes, tried to explain. "Chief, we had no idea. We were just following protocol." "Protocol for what?" the chief thundered. "Arresting 9-year-olds for playing basketball? Protocol for believing accusations without a shred of evidence? Protocol for treating my son like a dangerous criminal because a racist woman told you to?" "Sir, the complainant seemed credible," Sterling mumbled, now sweating profusely. "We were just doing our job." "Your job," Chief Mitchell replied, his voice rising with controlled fury, "is to serve and protect all members of this community. Your job is to investigate crimes, not to arrest children based on the prejudices of their neighbors. Your job is to use your training and your humanity, not to act as the enforcement arm for suburban racism." The truth was now laid bare for everyone to see. The 9-year-old boy they had handcuffed was the son of the most powerful law enforcement officer in their jurisdiction. It was time for consequences. Real consequences. Chief Mitchell stood in the middle of Rosewood Drive and began to deliver justice. He addressed his officers first, his words echoing with an authority that would resonate through the department for years. "Officers Blake and Sterling," he said, "you arrested my 9-year-old son without probable cause based on fabricated evidence, using excessive force against a child. You failed to conduct even the most basic investigation. You ignored witnesses who could have cleared this up immediately. You violated your oath, your training, and every principle of ethical policing." Blake and Sterling stood like condemned men as their careers ended in real time. "Report to Internal Affairs first thing Monday morning," the chief commanded. "You will be facing charges of police misconduct, violation of civil rights, and dereliction of duty. This incident will be thoroughly investigated, and I guarantee you, justice will be served." Chief Mitchell then turned his attention to Brinley. She stood rooted to the spot, her mind struggling to process how her meticulously crafted plan had just imploded into her worst nightmare. "Ma'am," he said, his tone shifting, becoming even more formal, more intimidating. "Filing false police reports is a felony in this state. Fabricating crimes, lying about stolen property, wasting police resources with manufactured emergencies. These are serious criminal charges that carry significant prison time." The color drained from Brinley's face, leaving a sickly, pale mask as the gravity of her situation finally began to sink in. This was no longer about neighborhood drama or petty embarrassment. This was about federal crimes and state felonies, a chasm opening up that could swallow her life whole. But Brinley, true to her nature, was not yet ready to accept responsibility. Instead, a torrent of desperate excuses poured from her lips, a performance that would have been pathetic had it not been so deeply revealing of her character. "This is all a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice climbing to a frantic pitch. "I was just trying to protect our neighborhood. I felt threatened. I thought I was doing the right thing. It was just a mistake," she stammered, grasping at any straw that might save her. "How was I supposed to know who he was? I was just being a good neighbor." Chief Mitchell listened to every word with the infinite patience of a man who had heard every possible variation of these lies over a long career. When she finally fell silent, he delivered a response that would haunt her for the rest of her life. He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing in the twilight, and began to read from the official transcript of her 911 call, his voice clear and unwavering for all to hear. "There's a black male, late teens, who's been robbing houses in our neighborhood. He just tried to break into cars, and when I confronted him, he became violent and threatening. I think he has a weapon." The words hung in the air like a toxic fog. Everyone listening understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, deliberate lie, designed to get a child arrested. But Chief Mitchell wasn't finished. He then began to read from her social media posts, the ones she'd made over the past 3 weeks, weaving a fiction of gang activity and drug dealing, all centered on a 9-year-old boy playing basketball. "You claimed my son stole items worth over $1,000, Chief Mitchell said, his voice growing harder, each word a hammer blow. "That's grand theft. You want to file a police report? Fine, let's file one right now, against you." And that's when the community, so long silent, began to find its voice. Mr. Dmitry Volkov, the contractor, stepped forward, his own phone in hand. "Chief Mitchell," he said, his accent thick with emotion, "I have been recording this woman harass your son for weeks. She follows him, she yells at him, she calls him names. I have a video of everything." Next came Mrs. Esperanza Santos, the elderly woman from across the street, her eyes welling with tears. "Officer, that little boy is an angel," she said, her voice breaking. "He helps me with my groceries every single week. He always says, 'Good morning, Mrs. Santos,' and asks how I am feeling. Never, never would he steal from anyone. This woman, she lies about everything." Even the Henderson family, who had watched the harassment in silence, finally found the courage to speak. "We should have said something sooner," Mr. Henderson admitted, shame coloring his voice. "We saw how she was treating Zion, and we knew it was wrong. We didn't want to get involved. We're so sorry. That boy doesn't deserve any of this." The evidence was overwhelming. The community testimony was undeniable. Brinley had systematically harassed, libeled, and attempted to criminalize a child based on nothing more than the color of his skin. Blake and Sterling, watching their careers disintegrate in real time, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the wreckage. "Chief, we're sorry," Blake began, but Mitchell cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You don't apologize to me," he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that could make grown men tremble. "You apologize to my son. You handcuffed a 9-year-old child and treated him like a hardened criminal. If you have an ounce of decency left in you, you will look that boy in the eye and apologize for the trauma you have caused." But that was not enough. "Your badges and your weapons, now." With shaking hands, Blake and Sterling removed their badges and surrendered their service weapons, right there on the pristine lawn of Rosewood Drive in front of the entire neighborhood. Their careers in law enforcement were over. Justice was being served in real time. Chief Mitchell turned back to Brinley, ready to deliver the final blow. "Ma'am, you will be facing criminal charges for filing false police reports, a felony carrying up to 5 years in prison. If you attempt to file an insurance claim for any of the items you falsely reported stolen, you will also face insurance fraud. Your pattern of harassment and cyberstalking constitutes criminal behavior under state law. And wasting police resources with your fabricated calls is a misdemeanor that carries significant fines and potential jail time." The legal consequences were devastating. The personal consequences were about to be worse. Later that evening, as the last of the police cars pulled away, the Mitchell family was finally reunited in the safety of their home. The professional mask of Chief Dakari Mitchell fell away, revealing only a father who embraced his son with a fierce love that transcended words. Dr. Imani Mitchell, having rushed from the hospital the moment she heard, still in her scrubs, joined the embrace. They sat together in their living room, processing the trauma, but also celebrating the quiet strength Zion had shown. "I'm proud of you, son," Chief Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did everything we taught you. You stayed calm, you were respectful, and you trusted the truth would prevail." "But I was scared, Dad," Zion admitted, finally letting the vulnerability show. "Being scared doesn't make you weak," Dr. Mitchell said, holding him close. "Being scared and still doing the right thing, that makes you brave." While the Mitchell family began to heal, the consequences for everyone else were just beginning. The incident ignited conversations across Rosewood Drive about racism, accountability, and the shared responsibility of community. Neighbors who had stayed silent now understood their own complicity. Preston Ashworth came home to find his wife facing felony charges. When he learned the full truth, the lies she had told, the child she had targeted, he was mortified beyond description. Word quickly spread that he was consulting divorce attorneys. The Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting, unanimously voting to remove Brinley from all positions. They issued a formal apology to the Mitchell family and implemented new anti-harassment policies. Brinley's own children, Caitlin and Braxton, were so ashamed they refused to speak to her, ostracized at school by friends who now knew the truth about their mother. Within a week, Brinley Ashworth was officially charged. Blake and Sterling were suspended, their careers finished. The department announced new protocols for training and accountability to prevent such an incident from ever happening again. 3 months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, the familiar sound of a basketball echoed from the Mitchell's driveway. But this time, Zion wasn't alone. He was surrounded by children from all over the neighborhood, black, white, Latino, Asian, joined in a pickup game that lasted until sunset. Mrs. Santos brought out lemonade. Mr. Volkov taught the kids Russian basketball terms. The Hendersons apologized directly to Zion and invited him to their son's birthday party. From his living room window, Chief Mitchell watched, proud of his son's resilience and amazed by the community's capacity to heal. Brinley Ashworth was nowhere to be seen. She had moved away in shame, facing trial, abandoned by her family, a pariah in the community that had finally seen her true character. The truth had surfaced. Justice had been delivered, and a 9-year-old boy who had done nothing wrong but exist had been vindicated. Because sometimes, truth has a way of finding the light, and justice has a way of finding those who seek to pervert it. And when it does, it reminds us all that courage, dignity, and doing the right thing will always triumph over hatred, lies, and the abuse of power. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.